Before a nation can be forged, it must be tested. In the mid-19th century, the United States, still a young republic, found itself at a breaking point. Deep divisions over economic systems, states' rights, and, most fundamentally, the institution of slavery, had created two separate societies within one country. For decades, a series of fragile compromises had held the nation together, but by 1860, the fault lines were too deep to mend. The election of a new president was the final, devastating crack that plunged the United States into its bloodiest conflict, the American Civil War. For 4 long years, brother fought brother, and a nation's fate hung in the balance. This conflict would not only determine whether the Union would survive, but would also force the country to finally reckon with the moral stain of slavery. The outcome would fundamentally reshape the American identity, create a more powerful federal government, and, at immense human cost, set the nation on a new, albeit difficult, path toward freedom and equality. But what were the specific issues that tore the nation apart? Who were the leaders that guided their armies and their people through this unprecedented struggle? And what was the lasting legacy of a war that changed America forever? The seeds of conflict, a nation divided. The American Civil War was not a sudden explosion of violence. It was the culmination of decades of growing tension between the North and the South. While some historians have framed the conflict as a simple matter of states' rights, the core issue that underpinned all other disputes was slavery. Slavery as the central issue. By the 1850s, the United States was economically, socially, and politically split into two distinct regions. The North was rapidly industrializing, with a free labor system where a growing immigrant population worked in factories and farms. The South, by contrast, remained a rural, agricultural society, with its entire economy and social structure dependent on the labor of over 4 million enslaved African Americans. This stark difference created a deep chasm between the two regions' cultural values and their political interests. The main political battle leading to the war was over whether slavery would be allowed to expand into new Western territories. The North's anti-slavery movement, led by figures like abolitionist Frederick Douglass, viewed this expansion as a moral abomination and a threat to free labor. The South, however, saw the expansion of slavery as a constitutional right and a necessity for its economic survival and political influence. Each new state admitted to the Union threatened to upset the delicate balance of power in Congress, pushing both sides to a breaking point. Failed compromises and political tension. Several attempts were made to resolve the slavery issue through compromise, but each one ultimately failed. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 temporarily balanced the admission of slave and free states. The Compromise of 1850 led to the controversial Fugitive Slave Act, which required all citizens to assist in the return of runaway slaves, angering many in the North and strengthening the abolitionist movement. A series of political and social shocks further inflamed tensions. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, leading to a violent proxy war known as Bleeding Kansas between pro- and anti-slavery settlers. In 1857, the Supreme Court's infamous Dred Scott decision declared that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. This decision was a profound victory for the South and a severe blow to the North. The final straw came with the election of 1860. The newly formed Republican Party, whose platform was explicitly anti-slavery expansion, nominated Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's victory, without a single electoral vote from the South, was a clear signal to the Southern states that they had lost all political power at the national level. Feeling that their way of life was under an existential threat, 7 Southern states seceded from the Union before Lincoln even took office. They formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. The war began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, a Union fort in Charleston, South Carolina. The war begins. From Fort Sumter to Gettysburg, the Civil War was a four-year struggle that unfolded across two main theaters, the Eastern Theater, primarily Virginia, and the Western Theater along the Mississippi River and in Tennessee. The Union and the Confederacy at the outset. The Union, the North, had significant advantages: a much larger population, a massive industrial base for producing weapons and supplies, a more developed railway network, and a professional navy. The Confederacy, the South, had its own strengths: highly motivated soldiers fighting on their home turf, a deeply rooted military tradition, and a number of brilliant military commanders. The war's first major battle, the First Battle of Bull Run, July 1861, ended in a shocking Confederate victory, shattering Northern hopes of a quick war. The early years of the war saw the Confederacy, led by the brilliant tactician Robert E. Lee, consistently defeat larger Union forces in the Eastern Theater. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia secured victories at the 7 Days Battles and the Second Battle of Bull Run. In the Western Theater, however, the Union was more successful. A relatively unknown general named Ulysses S. Grant rose to prominence with key victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee, 1862. Grant's strategy of controlling the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy became a core part of the Union's war effort. A turning point. The bloodiest single day in American history occurred at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, September 1862, where over 22,000 casualties were suffered. While tactically a draw, the battle was a strategic victory for the Union, as it repelled Lee's first invasion of the North. It was enough of a victory for President Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation did not immediately free all slaves, but it declared all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory to be free. It fundamentally changed the nature of the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a moral crusade against slavery, preventing European powers like Great Britain from officially recognizing the Confederacy. The year 1863 proved to be the turning point of the war. In July, the Union secured two decisive victories. In the East, the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 to 3, saw General Lee's second invasion of the North repulsed in a devastating three-day battle that marked the high-water mark of the Confederacy. In the West, General Grant's forces captured the fortress city of Vicksburg, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi River and effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. The final years and legacy of the war, with the victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the momentum of the war shifted decisively to the Union. In 1864, Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant as the supreme commander of all Union armies. Grant adopted a strategy of relentless, total war. Grant, Sherman, and the final push. Grant's plan was simple: use the North's vast numerical and industrial superiority to overwhelm the Confederate forces. He relentlessly pursued Lee's army in Virginia, even as he suffered staggering casualties. Simultaneously, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman embarked on his infamous March to the Sea, carving a path of destruction through Georgia to cripple the South's economy and its will to fight. By the spring of 1865, the Confederacy was on its last legs. Lee's army was starving and exhausted. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to Grant at Appomattox courthouse in Virginia. This had effectively ended the Civil War. Just days later, however, the nation was plunged into mourning when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. The consequences of a new nation. The Civil War's outcome was a decisive victory for the Union, but its consequences were far-reaching and complex. The abolition of slavery. The war resulted in the freedom of 4 million enslaved people. This was formally enshrined in the Constitution with the passage of the 13th Amendment in December 1865, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in the United States. A more powerful federal government, the war decisively ended the debate over states' rights versus federal authority. The Union victory cemented the idea of the United States as a single, indivisible nation, with the federal government holding ultimate power. The era of Reconstruction, the period following the war, known as Reconstruction, was a tumultuous and difficult time. The federal government attempted to reintegrate the southern states and secure the rights of newly freed African Americans through the 14th Amendment granting equal protection under the law, and the 15th Amendment granting voting rights to all men, regardless of race. However, a violent white backlash in the South, combined with a lack of sustained federal commitment, led to the collapse of Reconstruction by 1877, ushering in an era of racial segregation and oppression known as the Jim Crow era. Economic transformation. The war devastated the Southern economy, while the North's industrial economy boomed. The war's end marked the beginning of a period of rapid industrial expansion that would make the United States a global economic powerhouse. Human cost and lasting memory. The American Civil War remains the deadliest conflict in U.S. history, with over 620,000 soldiers killed. The memory of the war continues to shape the national conversation, particularly regarding issues of race, states' rights, and the meaning of American identity. The American Civil War was a crucible that forged the modern United States. It settled the question of whether the nation would survive as one and, in the process, redefined the very meaning of freedom for millions. While the war ended in 1865, its legacy and the struggle to fulfill its promises continues to this day.